Welcome to Sydney Clinical Psychology's program, Life Worth Living. In the last few weeks we've been talking about mindfulness and distress tolerance. This week we're going to be talking about a new topic, values. Okay, why values? Values tend to be looked at much later on in therapies like DBT, but in other treatments like acceptance and commitment therapy or ACT, values are introduced much early on, as we do in a Life Worth Living. Values can be seen as the why of therapy, while topics like distress tolerance and mindfulness provide the how. We need to have both in order to overcome problems like self-harm. We need to know how to manage psychological difficulties, but we also need to know why. Why would you sit with high levels of distress and use distress tolerance skills? Why would you pay attention to things that are happening in your life and learn mindfulness? The answer is to have a life worth living. And working on values allows us to identify and clarify what a life worth living would look like. Okay, so we're just going to have a look now at what values are before we talk a bit more about how useful they are. So values are deeply held ideas about what's important in life. To talk about values may seem far removed from everyday life for some people. It may seem like living life consistent with your values is unachievable, or just the realm of people like Gandhi or Martin Luther King. But think about this. When you come to group or therapy each week and listen to what's being discussed, what guides your behaviour? Have a think about that for a moment, and think about whether it's something like maybe respect for your fellow participants. So do you listen to them for that reason? Is it openness to change? Is that why you're coming each week? Do you try to act with integrity and self-respect while you're in group? These are all values. Similarly, when you buy a magazine or some bread from a shop, what guides how you treat the person in the shop? It's your values. So actually, you're using your values quite frequently in everyday life, perhaps without even recognising it. It's these values, these everyday values, that are the important things that you can focus on and use as a really key skill in overcoming difficulties like self-harm. Okay, so let's look a little bit more about what values are in a bit more detail. First, values tend to be single words. So they're words like compassion, integrity, honesty, competition, respect, and so on. Values also tend to be self-evident. By that, I mean that you just know that they're important. So I could value compassion, but I can't really explain why. I just know that it's important. I could say that it's good to be compassionate because it helps people, and maybe because in the end it helps me. But it still doesn't really explain why compassion matters. All that does is it tells us kind of reasons why we might act compassionately without really explaining the importance of compassion. Third, we know that values are true because we have a gut feel for them. So the truth of them doesn't lie in any reasons or rationality, but very deep inside us. What that means effectively is we intuitively know them to be true. So I know that it's true that compassion is really important without having to have reasons for it and explain it to anybody else. Similarly, I know that integrity and honesty are important. For other people, it may be things like competitiveness. They just know that these things matter. In addition to this then, because they are so powerful, values guide our behaviour. I've mentioned before that we're often using our values without being truly aware of them. Values can be really helpful when things are tough as well. They allow us to provide us with an anchor point, if you like, for deciding what's the right thing to do. So values provide us with clarity about what to do. We all know how to be more compassionate, caring, honest, genuine, and so on. Of course, it might be hard to act that way for different reasons, and sometimes when you act that way, it might not always turn out how you want it to be. But it's really important to be able to recognise that you acted consistent with your values, even if you didn't get the outcome you wanted. In fact, when you don't get the outcome you wanted, it can be very helpful to know that you did the right thing in the situation, even if it didn't go well. And if it does go very well, then you also get to say that you acted consistently with what mattered, while at the same time achieving something important. Okay, let's look at this final point about values that I'm going to make now, a bit more closely in a minute. So values are directions rather than goals. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail. In order to think about this idea of values as a direction, we might try and think about the idea of a compass. So let me just draw a compass first. So a compass provides us direction to travel in, but it doesn't actually provide us as a destination. So you can travel east, but you never get to east. Of course, you can travel east, and you might get to the coast or a city or somewhere else. But the coast in itself is not a direction. East is a direction, and the coast may be a goal. Similarly, values are directions that point to goals, but you never arrive at a value. So I may have a goal of holding down a job for a year. To do that, I will have to act in certain ways. So let's look at that a bit more. If my goal is to hold down a job for perhaps a year, what values do you think that I might need to use in order to guide my behaviour? Well, I might need to be reliable. I might need to be punctual. I might need to be hardworking. And I'll probably need to be committed. So can you see here the difference between values and goals? I can aim for and arrive at my goal of holding down a job for a year, but I never arrive at being reliable, punctual and so on. That's because I can always be more or less reliable, more or less hardworking and so on. Similarly, if my goal was to be a loving, attentive father, then there's no place I arrive at that's called loving, attentive father where I can go no further. I can always be more loving and more attentive. So let's bring this all together. I'll paraphrase a man called Viktor Frankl. He was a famous psychiatrist. Frankl wrote a book about the meaning of life called Man's Search for Meaning. Now Frankl knew a bit about life as he survived the concentration camps in the Second World War. Frankl said, and this is my paraphrasing of him, that the meaning of life is living your values in the moment. All the things we've discussed today point to this. Values are a behaviour, and they're things that we live. They can guide you, you can choose them, and most of all, what matters is the choice you make right now. It doesn't matter whether you live consistent with your values 10 minutes ago. What matters is the choice you make in the next moment. It doesn't matter whether certain aspects of your values seem a long way away. In any moment, you can make the choice to move in the direction you want to move in, to take a step forward towards the kind of life you want to have. In any moment, you can make a choice to be more honest, more caring, more understanding, more competitive, more respectful. And each moment is full of opportunities to make these choices. You can make these choices in how you talk to people, and what you eat, and how you dress, whether you brush your teeth. Each moment gives you the opportunity to make a values-based choice. So we come to the end of our talk on values in our program, A Life Worth Living.